Old crone, said the devil with a stern, cold frown, I do like your plan, but it just won't go down. I cannot change people for life, for a soul. As much as I'd like to, the plan would unroll. Here is my offer to aid you in your plight. I can swap your two bodies for one day and one night. Tomorrow at dawn you will wake as Hubert, and he will be you and covered with dirt, contending with fleas, wearing your smock. Yes, I imagine it'll be quite a shock. But tomorrow at midnight you two will switch back, and I'll take your soul down onto my rack. Unless, he added, picking his nail. What? She demanded and uttered a wail. Unless, he repeated, you fulfill a vow, a solemn oath in front of me now, to become so happy, so truly content, that you feel the love of heaven straight sent, and forgive that young prince and wish him so well that you would not wish to meet him in hell. If that be the case, then you'll release my spell. And, as he said that, before she could think, he summoned a parchment and a well of red ink. And so she was offered a Faustian bargain. She could not read, so we'll skip the jargon. He held out a quill for her to grasp. I agree to your terms, her scratchy voice rasped. Why tell you much more? She took up that quill and marked that old parchment and smiled, but still, that old Satan's laughter deep in his chest, it left her there feeling a lot of unrest. Satan was gone and the crickets were loud, but she smiled when she thought of the prince, oh so proud, waking tomorrow out in her hovel. She might ride there, she thought, and make him grovel. Whatever the case, she'd ruin his life, take back her gold, and anger his wife. And who knows, she mused as she walked back to Pappy, perhaps that's enough to make me so happy that I defeat the devil, win at this game, keep my own soul, and put old Nick to shame. That's the end of part 2. Again, if you got comments or questions, anything, feel free to leave them in the feed here, and I'll go over it and answer what I can at the end. Hopefully you're enjoying yourselves. I'm going to try and hit 4 parts today, so we're gonna roll right into part 3. But as you can see, we got a Faustian bargain going on. We got 2 protagonists right now. If you're paying attention, Poindexter the gnome has turned into a beautiful young woman who is married to Prince Hubert, and on midnight he's going to turn back into, midnight of the following day, he's going to turn back into the gnome self. And Hildebrand is now switching places with Hubert, so you can see that the things are getting complicated. I'll leave it at that. And now leave Hildebrand and on to part 3, which takes place in the castle, as you'll be happy to see. Poindexter woke up inside the guest room, so looking forward to wedding the groom. He was smelling of roses, skin soft as their petals, and into the pillow his curly head settled. He just couldn't wait to see young Hubert's face when the moon rose to midnight and he lost all his grace. When he shriveled back down to an ugly old gnome with a scraggly beard and a big old bald dome, his mean little eyes and his mean little head would stare out at the prince across their new bed. You told me, he'd say in a satisfied voice, that when I got married I'd have no good choice. You said if I married I'd marry a sheep. If that's true, on your knees and proceed to bleat. You seem to think that I was a fool, but now you'll agree that you have been schooled. And then he point out that since the consummation, oh God, I just did it again. Arrow keys versus, see, I'm going to learn from this and not do this again next time. All right, consummation, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. And then he pointed out that since the consummation, he was now heir to half of the nation. How things would go next he couldn't foresee, but just to be safe, he'd cut a limb from a tree and stowed it beneath the big golden bed, and he'd use it to cave in that pretty boy's head. The key to success, he realized and said, was to be sure that he and Hubert got wed. Therefore, he'd have to take all of his crap and act like he loved him and lay on the sap, hold hands in the hallway and kiss on the stairs, run little fingers through his gold stringy hair, blink his eyelashes, and bring him a beer. Whisper or nibble upon his right ear. Whatever the prince did or said, he'd ignore, remembering the horror that he had in store for that stuck-up prince in his golden bed. Yep, he thought, Hubert'll wish he was dead. In came the maids carrying the gown, the makeup, the jewelry, the tiara-like crown. He'd be a princess for a few short hours and lay with the prince within the South Tower. But in that South Tower, Hildebrand was waking Into the mirror a good look was taking. By God, or by Satan, the switch had occurred. She was now Hubert, and her joy was absurd. She cackled a laugh at the prince's own voice. Then breakfast came in, and she really rejoiced. Eggs, sausage, bacon, sweetbread, and tea. Such a wonderful feast she had never seen. She ate till she felt that her gut might just burst. Then she sat on her bed and thought of her curse. What could she do that would harm the prince worst? She made an agenda, including 4 things. 1, make sure he'd never be king. 2, get all her gold hidden safely outside. 3, poison his marriage with his pretty new bride. 4, infect that Hubert with a deadly disease. Making the list left her very well pleased. In a few lines, what she did was this. They're not comprehensive, but you get the gist. She went to the queen and made a complaint about the old king and his lack of restraint. She claimed that her father was getting quite old and that he was too wasteful with the kingdom's gold. She said the prince should be given the throne, hoping the king would then Hubert disown. She said many distasteful things about her own father, the white-bearded king, and when she did leave the queen's room at last, she left the queen staring, astounded, aghast. She then told to anyone that she came across that her, quote, father, the king, was a terrible boss, and said she'd be better, far better than he, when she was made king, which would very soon be the case, she hinted, if you know what I mean. And she followed that up with something obscene about today's marriage and the consummation, which would ensure the next generation. Then she called up her thugs on the subject of gold, and to these 2 fellows instructions she told, to take all the treasure out of the vault and drive it through town and not make a halt, until the money was all safely stowed under an oak tree that was far from the road, a tree in a field near an old disused stile, a place where the loot would be safe for a while. Then she sent a page to fill a big bottle with water that flowed between 2 filthy hovels, right through a pigsty and next to the spot where the servants do empty the queen's chamber pot. This bottle, she planned to drink it right down just moments before midnight came around, and thus she would surely the young prince infect with some dread disease that would cause him to retch. And maybe he'd get the runs in addition, adding yet more success to her mission. In fever then would the poor prince perspire, and if she was lucky, he might just expire. Lastly, old Hildebrand, in the guise of Prince Hubert, sought the sweet princess with intent to hurt her, feeling so badly she'd never forgive him. She was planning to turn their marriage so grim and hopeless that the young prince would despair of thoughts at the marriage he could ever repair. And so, with those plans, she accosted Poindexter, who intended to be kind and pleasant whatever. That mean prince dished out he would ignore it, even if insults rushed out in a torrent. And there we will leave them, as their marriage did loom between a bride, not a bride, and a groom, not a groom. So that's the end of part 3. You can see the plot thickening. It's called The Minstrel's...
They're both changed.
They are both changed. Yes, exactly. So the story's called A Minstrel's Tale, and the subtitle is A Comedy of Genders, because they both changed into opposite genders. The old hag has become a young prince. The old gnome has become a beautiful young girl who's going to be a princess. Things are kind of complicated here, and you'll have to see how it turns out. I'm going to read you one more part tonight, and then I'm going to sign off. I'll get on and answer any questions that you have for me, and then I think I'm going to come back if this is successful, which it seems like it is. I will come back next Friday, and I'll read the second half so that you can finish it off. And I'll make sure I upload the first half so that you can watch that sort of in preparation. But that's the plan. So let's hit the last part and the last part for tonight, part 4, and then we'll go from there. Let's see, part 4. Now, on to part 4, in which Hubert's awake inside the hovel and his mouth is agape. He's been itching from flea bites, rubbing his sores, missing his breakfast and riches and whores. He had aches in his bones and his stomach was screaming. Down from his eyeballs the tears they were streaming. Dear Lord in heaven, what's happened to me? I do not deserve this, I'm sure you agree. He blubbered and begged, but his stomach, it ached. So he went in the kitchen to look for a steak. The cupboards were bare, the fire burned low, the hen house was empty, and he stubbed his big toe. He looked for a shovel to dig up some food, and that's when he remembered the poor, simple, rude hag who had lived here, and he knew in that moment that he was the hag now. His bony hands showed it. Those and his feet and their sad lack of shoes and his sagging old skin and other things too. But just as he started to acknowledge the facts, down the long road he heard a whip crack. A wagon appeared, overloaded with gold, so heavily laden it drove ruts in the road. Riding upon it were his two old cronies, each with a bottle and a slab of bologna. They laughed as they rode, and one told a joke. Hubert wanted to shout, but just coughed out a croak. He ran into the road, calling out loudly, "Listen here, lads, please recognize me. I'm your Lord Hubert, the Prince. Do step on down and help me now, since I will soon make it so worth your while, and I will reward you with gold from that pile." The two thugs, they slowed, then halted the cart, stepped down, walked over, and one gave a fart. A thunderous noise that spooked all four horses. Thanks, Alden, for the sound effect. But the cart was so heavy that they only snorted. One thug looked to the other and back at the hag. "Ain't had enough, witch?" He grabbed hold of her rags. "We took all your stuff, sure enough, yesterday, and here you are standing right in our way." He ripped off the rags, shoved her down in the mud, kicked in her teeth with a force that drew blood. "Gats!" the second gasped as he covered his eyes. "I wanted to kill you." He turned to the side. "But to do that, I'd have to gaze on you naked. And already one glimpse has almost taken the sight from my eyes and the sense from my head. Rather than see you, I would be dead. Get out of my sight and off of this road. I've a crossbow up there that I'll jump up and load. And if I see you again ever round here, I'll shoot one sharp quarrel right into your rear." Up Hubert stood, blood dribbled onto his chest. Naked he ran, never stopping to rest. Sobbing and shaking he fled to the church, straight to the altar and stopped with a lurch. He fell to his knees, tears mixing with blood, dripping down to the floor and mixing with mud. "Dear God," he began, "I didn't believe that something so awful could happen to me." He sniffed, then sobbed, and with some hesitation, he closed his eyes tight to receive revelation. He knew at that moment how wicked he was. He knew he deserved this, and he knew it because his two greatest friends had treated him thus. And he himself had done so much worse. All of his life had seemed like a game he was winning, so he felt no shame. Until the roles switched and the thundering sound of his own iniquity struck his soul down. He lay on the floor in a fetal position, sobbing and shaking till he felt submission. He straightened himself up, looked to the roof, and said, "Dear, dear God, please send me some proof that an awful man can change his cruel ways and live so much better the rest of his days." And down from the rafters, a light beam descended. Harps started ringing. His bleeding, it ended. An angel in white drifted down from the ceiling, perched on the cross, and said with feeling, "What wilt thou do, O Prince Hubert the Spoiled, to show that foul Satan's plans can be foiled?" He adjusted his halo, fluttered his feathers. "How wilt the young prince shed hell's heavy fetters?" Eyes looking down, all Hubert could think was that he'd join the church, and more, he would sink himself into poverty, and instead of a sire, he'd take the vow and become a poor friar, poor as the people he used to torment. And he'd save their souls, and they would repent, and, if he made enough from his daily begging, he would eat well and buy some warm leggings. For who would begrudge him a few poor comforts if he was out doing the work of the church? He then made a vow with his hands clasped in prayer, and after he added, "If you'll help me get there, return my old body, remove all this dirt, make me a man and give me a shirt. If by some miracle when I awake I am a friar, then that path I'll take, healing the sick, undoing my wrongs, saving the sinners, and singing church songs." And the angel, he heard him, and knew that he meant it. But he also knew that he'd live to repent it, for a bad man is bad, and rarely does he change all that much, not for long, as you'll see. Yet a holy angel came to Hubert that day and told him that this would all go away, and that he'd be a friar, and that he'd take the vow, and that it would happen a few hours from now. He gave him a cloak and told him to sit in the back of the church and just wait for a bit. But he didn't agree to save Hubert's soul.